Welcome back to the Unsolicited Film Reviews podcast. I'm Zach Miller, and the man screen right, yeah, that way is Martin Cook. I pointed the wrong way last week. Today we're covering the second half of the illustrious and legendary career of the man Steven Spielberg. But first, we have some industry news to address. In breaking news, Argentine composer Lolo Schifrin, the writer of the Mission Impossible theme, Dirty Harry, Cool Hand Luke, and over 100 other scores for legendary films, has died at 93. It's a life well lived, though. So, R.I.P. Definitely not a household name, but I just saw that right before we got on. So,
Yeah, but the tunes he made are definitely instantly recognizable. Dun 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 dun. Yeah.
and it was announced on Wednesday, yesterday, as we're recording this, that Denis Villeneuve is going to be the director of the next James Bond film that was officially announced. And of course, he's director of Dune and Dune 2. What are your thoughts on this?
I'm very excited. I mean, I'm both a big Denis Villeneuve fan and also a big James Bond fan. And I have to admit, I was a bit nervous when Amazon took over the James Bond franchise earlier this year. Or was that late last year? They basically bought out the Broccoli family, who had been producing it for 50 years or something. And you never know what's going to happen, but this is a very good first step. And it's starting the franchise sort of all over again. So that should give Denis some latitude. And I just hope he does something a little different and very interesting with it.
Yeah, I thought it was smart to pick the director before casting the next Bond.
Yes. Yeah.
But my one thing is, I hope it doesn't mean Denis will be bogged down for the next 3 or 4 Bond movies. I'm worried that he's wasting his prime years on pre-existing IP when he's such a
Right.
skilled and visionary filmmaker.
Yeah, that's a bit of a concern. Although I don't think, I mean, you never know what Amazon's going to try to do, but I would guess that he probably is only signing on for one, maybe two movies, just to kind of set the tone for this next iteration of James Bond, and then he'll remain maybe in a producing role or something going forward. That would be my guess. We haven't seen details of what the deal is yet, but I think he's got enough clout at this point that he could even kind of direct terms to Amazon.
Hmm. And then Variety put out an article after interviewing some studio executives. The Hollywood bigwigs fear that the traditional theater going experience has like 20 years at most before it succumbs entirely to streaming. But it seems like these guys cry wolf every fucking year, and then there's a few billion-dollar movies and they shrink back into their mansions. So, do you have any thoughts on that?
It does seem like something that they've said before, and not just during the pandemic. Like, this is something that people were talking about 10 years ago and 15 years ago and 20 years ago. So I don't think we need to be overly concerned. Obviously, there are some developments over the last little while that have had a big impact on theaters, but I don't think it's going to die out entirely as a business model. I just don't see that.
And then apparently 626 Day has become a thing this year, and Lilo and Stitch is about to be the first $1 billion movie of the summer. And Stitch is very happy. Must be Martin.
Well,
And so Lilo and Stitch 2, the live action sequel to the one that I was just talking about, is coming out, and it's in pre-production right now, which of course we could all see that coming, because you make $1 billion with Disney, you're gonna get a sequel.
definitely. And speaking of streaming, I mean, it is very notable that when they first came up with the concept for this new Lilo and Stitch movie that is now, as you say, close to $1 billion, there was some thinking originally that it would just go direct to streaming. So this again maybe is some help at pushback on that kind of thing.
Yep. So box office report. We got a lot to cover, so let's get through this
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So that takes us into the
shit.
box office report. And How to Train Your Dragon, second week in a row at number one, 36.6 mil weekend. It's at about 370 million worldwide now. The first new entrant is 28 years later, which I think did probably better than most people expected. a $30 million weekend and 66 million worldwide. Third place, and this is a disaster, both for Disney Pixar and also for me in my summer blockbuster draft. Elio made 20.8 million on the weekend. Now, this is its first weekend. To put this in context, this is the hands down worst opening ever for a Disney Pixar movie. I mean, we're talking worse than The Good Dinosaur here. It's absolutely terrible for
Worse
them.
than Elemental.
Yes. Elemental is the one silver lining
Exactly.
because
Yeah.
Elemental opened to 29 million and still went on to make about 500 million worldwide through good word of mouth. And Elio does have a good CineScore. It's got an A, so people who are going to see Elio, the 2 or 3 people who did, seem to like it. But this is just an unmitigated disaster for Disney and Pixar. Not the disaster, though, is the one that you just mentioned, and still on the list in fourth place, Lilo and Stitch, about another 9.7 million on the weekend, 914 million worldwide now. So inching closer to that billion mark. And in its fifth weekend, and also in its fifth weekend, Mission Impossible, about 6 million more, and it's over 500 million, 547 million worldwide. So it's also done quite well.
Yeah, so the theater experience is definitely not dead.
No.
That's for sure. Although creativity might be. Anyway, so coming this week, F1, now stylized as F1 the movie, is coming out this week. It's one of the most expensive movies ever made to the tune of almost $400 million just to get it made. So whether it turns a profit or not is up in the air, but I'm sure it's going to at least generate some box office interest for sure. I mean, I'm going this weekend. So it stars Brad Pitt and newcomer Damson Idris, and it covers the sport of F1. Then we have another behemoth, Jurassic World Rebirth, stars Scarlett Johansson and Jonathan Bailey. Then we have Megan 2.0, sequel to the 2022 horror sci-fi sleeper hit. Sorry Baby, it's an A24 dramedy. And Fathom Events is hosting re-releases of the 90s classic Clueless, as well as the Chinese romance movie In the Mood for Love. So let's get into the meat of this podcast. Steven Spielberg, part 2. Too big for just one podcast, and it turns out too big for just 2 podcasts.
That's true. Yeah, we'll get to that at the very end. But let's go back to where we left off. We left Spielberg riding high on the success of the dinosaur extravaganza Jurassic Park at the end of part 1, which to date has now spawned about 6 sequels and made billions of dollars. He was undoubtedly the biggest director in the world at that time. So that would have been about 1993. But he had also started making a serious mark as a producer. We mentioned briefly a couple of his producing credits from the 80s that some people mistakenly remember as being directed by him in Poltergeist and Goonies, but there were many, many more, which you'll talk about in a second. A lot of that came through his production company, Amblin Entertainment, which he founded in 1980 with Kathleen Kennedy and Frank Marshall, 2 pretty well-known names who would actually later get married. So that's interesting. And Amblin was obviously named after one of his first commercially produced short film. So he, not only produced movies, he got into animated series. But by 1991, Kennedy and Marshall had left the company to go. They, not on bad terms. They still remained friends. Kennedy still produced a bunch of Spielberg's films after that. But Spielberg had even bigger ambitions. And by 1994, he joined with 2 other entertainment titans, music producer David Geffen and animation guru Jeffrey Katzenberg, to do something that hadn't been done in Hollywood since 1928, and that was to form a new film studio. And that was
Wow.
DreamWorks Pictures.
28. Wow.
Yeah, the first since RKO Pictures in 1928. And so DreamWorks became obviously a major player in Hollywood instantly. And through that, he produced a bunch of other things, not only as head of a production company, but now head of a studio. But Spielberg's personal life was also changing in the 90s. He had become a committed family man after the failure of his first marriage to Amy Irving in the 80s. He married Kate Capshaw, who he met on the set of Temple of Doom. They got married in 1991. And it's been one of these few Hollywood marriages that's actually lasted. They're
Yeah, it started
still,
out as a total cliche, the
yeah,
director marrying his actress, but it worked out
it
apparently.
absolutely worked out. Yeah, they're still happily married to this day. They share 6 kids. And yeah, they just seem to be very, very solid. So good for them. Um, but yeah, why don't you talk a little bit more about a lot of the producing hits that he had over the
Sure, as you mentioned, he's done a lot more than just directing. I mean, DreamWorks has produced everything from Anchorman to Shrek. He's also one of the most prolific producers in Hollywood history. Films, TV, even video games, nothing is out of this man's reach. He's even done a few music videos. One as recently, as I just found out, one as recently as 2022 for Mumford and Sons.
Oh,
So,
I didn't even hear that. Wow,
so,
interesting.
yeah. First off, Spielberg and ex-Disney animator Don Bluth partnered up and nearly toppled the Disney empire in the late '80s. Amblin produced An American Tail, The Land Before Time, All Dogs Go to Heaven, Rock-a-Doodle, among others. Some of my childhood favorites and much better than what Disney was putting out at the time. But in a great instance of the marketplace at work and capitalism, Disney was forced to improve its product, which they of course did, but that's another story for another podcast. As far as executive producer, aka EP credits, his list is massive. Highlights include Gremlins, Back to the Future, Who Framed Roger Rabbit, We're Back, A Dinosaur Story. And that was a genius move because it came out right along Jurassic Park in '93, but it was an animated family-friendly movie, so he cornered the entire dinosaur-related market in '93. The live-action Flintstones movie, Casper, Twister, Men in Black, The Mask of Zorro, the shitty but massively popular Transformers series.
Yep.
And most recently, the live action How to Train Your Dragon and Jurassic Park, no, sorry, Jurassic World Rebirth. And that's basically just the short list. There's like 50 other ones, if not more.
Yeah.
In the TV world, he executive produced Tiny Toons Adventures, Animaniacs. What up?
Woo! Possibly
Which,
the greatest animated series for kids. I love Animaniacs so much.
yeah, there's a lot of if you go back and watch it, it's way ahead of its time. There's a lot of adult themes in Animaniacs, and it really holds up even if you're, 30 plus.
Yeah, you got Yakko, Wacko, and Dot right there on your shirt. Love
Yep.
it.
And it was stylized as Steven Spielberg's Animaniacs because if you put that man's name on anything, it's going to do business for sure. The spin-off, Pinky and the Brain, Freakazoid, switching gears at the turn of the century, he got way more into adult fare like Band of Brothers, Semper Fi, Into the West, The Pacific, and Masters of the Air.
Yeah.
Oh man, I
There
don't
were also 2 war films that he produced around that time too, with Flags of Our Fathers and Letters of from Iwo Jima.
for sure. Yeah, I don't think the guy slept from 1975 to 2005.
No.
He has his hand in every pot as far as visual entertainment. He even designed the World War II video game Medal of Honor, which for my money had better gameplay and a way better story than Call of Duty. Call of Duty's just devolved into multiplayer. Can you no scope this guy and snipe this guy? But yeah, when I do play video games, I don't play them as much as I used to. I'm playing for the stories, so it makes me a bit of an outcast. But what are you gonna do? Anyway, so films part two.
Yeah, so let's again get back. So we left off in 1993, and despite all his successes, there were still a few things that eluded him. And so we go back to the time of Jurassic Park. He never won an Oscar, despite directing nominations for Close Encounters of the Third Kind, Raiders of the Lost Ark, somewhat surprisingly, and E.T. And he'd also yet to really make an impact outside of film and entertainment. And that brings us to the next movie, the next movie that he did right after Jurassic Park, and it couldn't be more different. And it's still spectacular to think that the same director was responsible for these 2 movies in a 12-month span. And that movie was Schindler's List. So he'd been given the book Schindler's List by Thomas Keanly. He had had the book for about 10 years and it had been given to him by his old mentor, Sid Sheinberg, who we talked about in the first episode. But, understandably, he was overwhelmed by the material and the weight of everything that went along with the story. So he sat on it for a number of years, not sure if he was mature enough for it, and even tried to pass it off to a bunch of other directors. But the more he sat with it, he wanted to do something for his family and his culture. And some of that guilt we talked about in the first episode about not fully embracing his Jewishness as a child weighed on him a little bit. So eventually he decided he was going to do it. It was greenlit by Scheinberg, but only if Spielberg agreed to do Jurassic Park first. It's interesting because obviously Scheinberg realized that if he did Schindler's List first, he wasn't really going to want to do Jurassic Park next. So very smart on that part. But it was only given a budget of $22 million. A 3+ hour black and white film about the Holocaust. This was not expected to make much money. It was obviously just more about the importance of telling the story. Spielberg even refused to take a salary for it, and he didn't think it was going to do very well. But needless to say, it went on to become both a critical and commercial hit, and just frankly, one of the most important films of all time. It made over 322 million at the box office on 22. So lots of people saw it, which was very good. And then it was nominated for 12 Academy Awards, winning 7 to the Spielberg's first 2 for Best Director and also for Best Picture as a producer. And then here's where we get into the impact outside of film, or still connected to film, but outside of Hollywood. Because with all the money that movie made, and as a producer, Spielberg just didn't feel it was right to profit on what he saw as blood money, the story of the Holocaust. So he used every dollar from that film to create the Shoah Foundation, which is a nonprofit organization that's dedicated to recording and preserving evidence and testimonials about the Holocaust. It currently, according to the website, contains over 59,000 testimonies from survivors and witnesses of the Holocaust, the Armenian genocide, and other atrocities. Just an incredible contribution to humanity that came on the heels of Schindler's List.
Yeah, and unfortunately, that 59 million is still not enough because Holocaust denial is at an all-time high right now. It's disgusting.
Stupid. Yeah.
Yeah,
Disgusting, stupid, everything. Yeah.
Yeah, the main theme gives me goosebumps every time I hear it, no matter where I am or what context it's in. It's just so sorrowful yet so beautiful. And one of my favorite stories about this movie is when, John Williams has done almost all of composer John Williams. I mean, you should know his name by now if you listen to us regularly, but yeah, composer John Williams, when Spielberg brought this project to him, he's like, there are so many people that could do this better than I could. And Spielberg was like, yeah, but they're all dead.
Yeah.
That's one of my favorite anecdotes between those two. And yeah, man, the performances were amazing. Ray Fiennes, one of the all-time great villains, he pretty much sold the show, even though Liam Neeson was the star and he put in a equally amazing performance. But Ray Fiennes was just you need that duality if you're gonna have a good guy, bad guy playing off of one another. So yeah, visually stunning. The girl in the red dress, everything was just so perfect about this film.
Yeah, it really was. And it's as I said, it's what, 3 hours and 15 minutes, 3 hours, 20 minutes, black and white. It is not slow and plotting somehow, despite that. It holds your attention the entire time. It is just such a well-made film. It's incredible.
Yeah, and one last thing, the way it, like, infiltrated pop culture at the time. One of my favorite bits about this was during one of the Seinfeld episodes
Yeah.
where Jerry was making out with one of his
Making out
girlfriends.
during Schindler's List.
Yeah. He's making out during one of the most important movies, especially since he's Jewish. So yeah, that was a whole episode, and one of the
Horrified his parents. Yeah.
yeah, one of the great Seinfeld episodes. But yeah, fantastic movie, one of the greatest of the 20th century.
Yeah.
Then we have The Lost World Jurassic Park. It's the 1997 sequel to Jurassic Park, obviously. Only Jeff Goldblum and Richard Attenborough returned from the original. While it was the second highest grossing film of that year, it was received with middling to poor reviews, but it's the follow-up to Jurassic Park. Like, what are you gonna do? Like, even Spielberg himself admitted that it was a foolish attempt to try to catch lightning in a bottle twice. Yet, here we are on the eve of him producing another damn one 30 years later.
Yeah, this is. I don't really have too much to say about The Lost World. It's basically a lesser version of Jurassic Park. So it certainly isn't a sequel that in any way surpasses or comes close to the original. The special effects just continued to get better and better, but that's about all you can say about it.
Yep.
So that takes us to Amistad in 1997. So, having tackled one of the horrific human atrocities of the past few centuries with the Holocaust, Spielberg decided to attempt to deal with the other, slavery. And for this, he again chose to portray a real historical story. This time, the events of the legal battle around the Spanish slave ship La Amistad. Uh, Horrible name for a slave ship because it means friendship. Um, which in 1839, when a bunch of slaves fought their way to control the ship and attempt to regain their freedom. The film starred Morgan Freeman, Anthony Hopkins, Matthew McConaughey, a bunch of others, including Stellan Skarsgård. But the breakout was it was the breakout role for Digimon Hansu, who played the leader, the basically legendary leader of the slave revolt, Sinke. Now, this movie, in my opinion, didn't get nearly the attention that it deserved. It barely made its money back. It was nominated for 4 Oscars, but didn't win any. But I think it's a fantastic film. It is,
Yeah.
yeah. It's just unlike we talked about the color purple a little bit in the first episode and how Spielberg probably wasn't the right guy at that time to tell this story. It's unclear, Spielberg may still not have been the right guy, but he's so much more mature as a filmmaker by 1997 that he treats the subject matter just in a much more nuanced way, and I think a better way in Amistad than in Color Purple.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And while, yeah, he might have not been the perfect choice to direct this, he comes at it from a person who's descendant from a people that has been historically oppressed and slaughtered. So, I mean, at least he come at it through that angle. While, yeah, of course, during the color purple was just like completely out of his element, especially for his age at the time and his experience. So, yeah, I agree with that point. But yeah, Digimon Hansu was robbed as far as even being recognized at all by any awards
Yeah,
organization.
he was so electric in
Yeah,
this
he
movie.
really was.
Just the intensity, the intelligence. There's a lot of it because a lot of the performance, obviously, he doesn't really speak English. He's speaking in Denbei. He's speaking some other languages, but and a lot of it is just on his face and just an incredible performance.
Yeah, definitely. And I always respect when a foreign language is spoken without subtitles in a movie and we're left
Yes.
to infer it from the acting
Yep.
and because it doesn't insult the audience's intelligence. And but also it makes sense in this one because the American characters can't understand the Africans either, so
Yeah.
we're in the same position, so it makes perfect sense that we aren't getting what they're saying.
Yeah, and a lot
Um
of the early part of the story is about the communication gap. Well, actually, throughout a lot of the story,
yep.
not just communication gap, but also cultural gap and people trying to find understanding across those divides.
Yeah, Matthew McConaughey is probably the weak link in this one.
Yeah,
He does a serviceable job, but he's up against a lot of like all-time great actors and great performances. And
yeah, it's basically him doing his performance from A Time to Kill, but with
mm,
period dress.
yeah, the Hopkins monologue is what actors live for. Like,
So good. Yeah.
Yeah. I forgot Anna Paquin was in this as the Queen of Spain.
Yeah, it's very odd, small little role where she's speaking with an odd Spanish accent. Yeah, very, very strange, but it worked because she was very young when she did this.
Yeah, I first saw this movie in high school history class. Like, I don't know if it's the same in Canada, but if you're in high school in America, most of your education is through teachers just like doing their own thing and showing you movies, which is why our system is completely broken, but that's beside the point.
Yeah, you have to hope that they're at least somewhat historically accurate.
Yeah. But yeah, I totally forgot that this was also more or less entirely a courtroom drama.
Yes. Yeah.
And it's kind of billed as, slave rebellion, but yeah, going back, it's much more just people arguing back and forth, and I love that. So fantastic.
It is, but I mean, there's a very long-ish flashback bunch of scenes about Cinque
Hmm.
getting captured in the first place and going through the process of the slave fortress in West Africa and coming across on the ship and just the horrors of being on those slave ships. If anybody, there's a few different African American museums there's one in Washington, there's a really good one in Detroit, and a couple of them have some of these uh, mock-up of some of those slave ships, and even
Hmm.
that obviously doesn't come close to the horror in terms of the stench and just everything, the being shackled to somebody who's dead. And I thought those scenes in this movie did about as good a job as you could to portray some of that terror and horror.
Yeah, and to that point, I live in Virginia, and home of George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, two of our founding fathers, great Americans, but both slave owners. But if you go to their historical homes, they do a good job of explaining the duality of being a great man, but being a person at the time, and it's fucked. Of course, it's fucked up. It's
Yeah,
slavery, but they do a good job of explaining that whole history and not kind of whitewashing it like they probably did in years past.
right.
So, on to another serious movie. Saving Private Ryan, 1998, marks another turn in Spielberg's filmography away from the whimsical and towards the adult. Opening on D-Day in Normandy, France, June 6, 1944, and its subsequent events. The film focuses on a group of U.S. soldiers led by Tom Hanks's Captain John Miller, no relation. Their mission: to locate the titular Private James Ryan and bring him home after his three brothers are killed in action. The cast includes Matt Damon as the title character, although he's only in the third act, Edward Burns, Tom Sizemore, and a baby-faced, pre-Fast and Furious Vin Diesel. It's a complex study of warfare, morality, and the value of one man's life against another's, or several others in this case. Widely considered to be one of the best war movies of all time, and the opening on Omaha Beach, especially, is praised as one of the best action sequences of all time. It was hugely successful, both critically and commercially. Spielberg won his second Oscar for directing, but in a shocking upset, the film lost to Shakespeare in Love for Best Picture, mostly, if not entirely, on the back of Harvey Weinstein's bullying campaign against his fellow film executives.
Yep.
Fortunately, history has
And
not been,
bribes. Yeah.
yeah, fortunately, history has not been kind to that particular campaign, and it's widely considered to be one of the biggest robberies in Oscar history.
This was one of the movies that I went back and watched this past week, rewatched again. And those first 25 minutes get all the attention, and for very good reason. The scenes of them storming, the sound design in those scenes is what stood out to me again rewatching it. Just the bullets, the way they hit the water, the just pinging off of ships and all, it just unbelievable sound design. But every moment of those 25 minutes is just harrowing. But then you kind of forget that a lot of the other battle sequences in the film are great in their own right.
Yep.
There's one scene where they're dealing with a sniper up in a small village. The final battle where there's a couple of tanks coming and they're supposed to hold a bridge and the Germans just keep coming and they're losing their positions and falling back bit by bit. And you jump back and forth between the different people that we've come to know, the sort of the cowardly translator, the tough guy sniper, the just it's just incredibly done. And then some of the other moments in this film stand out as well. There's the moment where things are really tense and guys are really bickering amongst each other, and it reaches the point where his sergeant is threatening to shoot one of the guys who's threatening to walk away from the mission, and it just really seems like they're about to go off and somebody's going to get hurt. And that's when Tom Hanks's character calls back to something that had been running storyline throughout, which is who he was.
Hmm.
And that was just a great moment to diffuse the tension in the scene, in the moment, but also highlighted one of the main themes of the movie, which is these were just guys.
Yeah, he was a school teacher, right?
He was a school teacher.
Yeah.
And these were just guys who just thrown in to this unbelievable situation, who otherwise just would have been going about their daily lives. Just, yeah, an incredible movie.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, the Omaha Beach scene is yeah, obviously the scene, but yeah, it can't receive enough praise. Like you said, the sound design was the pew pew, and yeah,
Yeah.
it's just so incredible. Like if that was just a short film, it'd probably be one of the best short films of all time.
Yeah.
So,
Well, and the sound, I mean, just everything about it, because it wasn't just the sound, even the color choices that Spielberg and Janusz Kaminski as his director of photography made. In some scenes, it almost seems like one of those colorized videos
oh yeah,
or
yeah.
images of World War II. Like they deliberately chose a color palette that was kind of muted, and some of the colors would just the thought that they put into every moment of this film was really inspiring.
Yeah, and like the whole moral dilemma where they're trying to decide whether to kill the German soldier, and he's like trying to speak English to him, and like, no, I love America, baseball, and like all that stuff. Yeah, that there's so many moral dilemmas in this that just illustrate how savage war is and how it's definitely not just good guys and bad guys. Like these are just kids thrust into a situation that they never anticipated they'd be in. So yeah, yeah, fantastic all the way through.
Yep.
And this helmet that I donned for this segment is brought to you by my stepdad, who was in the armed forces, and this is actually a real army helmet.
Nice.
All right, so with that, I think it's time for a drink. And tonight we are doing something called torpedo juice, but it's torpedo juice light. Torpedo juice was invented by US sailors that were just drinking basically straight ethanol and mixed with whatever juice they could, whatever fruit juice that was on hand at the time, just so they could get drunk and forget that they were probably about to die at any second.
Yes.
So we're not doing that. But I did manage to get my hands on some 100 proof vodka, so this
Oh
will
wow.
be
Okay.
interesting. And
So
so the ethanol, well, back in the day, that was 180 proof, which was 90% alcohol. And since I did not feel like punishing my liver quite that much tonight,
no, no, we don't need to die tonight.
I am doing two shots of this 100 proof though.
Okay.
And then, all
I'm just going regular vodka here.
right, doing same amount. This is all equal parts because it's supposed to be a simple drink for simple sailors. This is pineapple juice.
Speaking of sailors, my grandfather was in World War II on in the Canadian Navy, so that's my connection to the war. He wasn't part of the people storming the beaches or anything, but he did escort duty in what they called the triangle of all the supply ships and everything going from New York and Canada and London and well, not London, but England. And so he was in one of the escort ships trying to make sure that they didn't get sunk by German U-boats.
Nice.
And he was very proud of the fact that his convoy never lost a ship in the 2+ years that they were out there.
Oh, cool. And the of course ugly American response would be, "Wait, Canada had a navy?"
Yeah, yeah, yeah. We were in that
So,
war 2 years before you were. Uh, all right, sorry. How much pineapple juice and how much grapefruit juice?
okay, so it's all equal parts. It's 2 shots of vodka, 2 shots of pineapple juice, and 2 shots of grapefruit juice.
All right.
And then since I had just had this on hand, have a spear, just a toothpick through a bit of mango, and still trying to get rid of this jar of maraschino cherries I've been working on for the past month or so. Trying to put this in every drink that it'll work on. So
Yeah, that is the thing about unsolicited drink reviews. We find drinks that we want to try that have some connection to what we're talking about in film, but that sometimes means that we have a lot of interesting alcohol and other accessories that we're trying to get rid of. Like, we
exactly.
really need to find more blue curacao drinks
Yeah.
and Campari drinks. All righty.
All right, so yeah, this is the torpedo
Mix mine
juice.
up again, although I probably didn't need to do it with the juice, but there we go. Little shaken, not stirred. The Mulan movie. That should be very good and very refreshing. So
All
let's
right.
move on.
Well, what
The
do you
next
think of it
movie.
first?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it is. Unsolicited drink reviews. Let's give our review.
Oh yeah, that goes down easy.
Yeah, I like the mix of the grapefruit with the pineapple.
Yeah, that's
That's
dangerously
not bad
easy,
actually. Yeah,
especially since I
very
have the
easy.
100, especially I have the 100 proof. Yeah,
Yeah.
that could be very dangerous.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, it might be a little different if we were drinking the gut rot that they would have been drinking in the ships, but with
No
me
doubt
with
about
just
that.
regular vodka, it's very, very smooth.
All right, yeah, let's get going.
So let's jump forward in the future then. And then we've got artificial intelligence, which was AI artificial intelligence. Now, Spielberg was a huge admirer of Stanley Kubrick. 2001 was a big influence on Close Encounters of the Third Kind and some of the earlier stuff that Spielberg had done. And Spielberg in 1995, Kubrick had the rights to this movie idea since the early 70s, but he
Hmm.
just never finished it. Never. So in 1995, he
It's
handed.
classic Kubrick.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it took over 25 years. And then eventually he just handed the movie over to Spielberg and basically gave him the rights, said, no, you're going to be the guy to do this. But production didn't really gain momentum until Kubrick's death. And then at that point, Spielberg really wanted to honor Stanley Kubrick by finishing the movie and making it. It starred Haley Joel Osment, Jude Law again, Francis O'Connor, William Hurt, and a bunch of others. It was moderately successful. It more than doubled its $100 million budget, but it definitely wasn't beloved. And I think it kind of had a hard time finding its tone and message, right?
Hmm.
It was sort of caught between Kubrick and Spielberg's sensibilities, and they're very different filmmakers as much as they were friends. And so I'm not sure it ever really worked, taking an unfinished thing from Kubrick and then putting Spielberg kind of on top of it. It just never really found its tone. But it was definitely interesting, but not amongst Spielberg's best, I don't think.
Yeah, I thought it was one of his weaker movies, although definitely prescient
Yeah.
as far as
Yes.
sci-fi goes. And yeah, you're absolutely right. I knew Kubrick was attached at one point, but I didn't know there was that kind of handoff moment
Mhm.
between the two. So yeah, that makes sense why this is kind of discordant as far as tone goes. So Then we have Minority Report, another sci-fi futuristic one, based on another novel by a sci-fi legend. It's 1956 Philip K. Dick novel. Although it's very loosely based, it was just kind of
Yeah.
took the concept. It wasn't very loyal to the subject matter. Stars Tom Cruise and Colin Farrell. I think that was Colin Farrell's first like major role. Uh, it takes place in 2056, but it's always like the sci-fi thing where it's like in the near future,
Yeah.
and where the police are able to determine whether a person will commit a crime before they commit it. And it's an very interesting thought experiment, but not a particularly good movie, in my opinion. It was a success at the box office, though, and it was, yeah, it's definitely one of those things that makes you think, but I don't think it's carried the premise as far as it could have.
I actually like this movie obviously a lot better than you do. I think it was quite good, and it's another one that I rewatched, or most of it. And a lot of the future stuff I really liked. And as you said, some of these movies are kind of prescient. Like the targeted advertising part of this
Hmm.
movie, I thought was really interesting. He's walking down the street and everything's reading your eyeballs, so it knows who you are. And it's like, oh, hey, Zach Miller, I see you would want a new Animaniac shirt and stuff like that. And that is so what happens today. And in 2025, it's just happening on our phones and their screens and everything else. But what I thought was really interesting was the way it did deal with some of these questions about what exactly justice means and predetermination in terms of actions. There's one scene where he rolls a ball and Colin Farrell catches it before it drops on the ground, and they're talking about whether or not you can stop something, but whether that means it was still going to happen until you
Hmm.
stepped in. And I don't know. I actually really enjoyed a lot of those little things, and I thought it did it in an entertaining manner. So I'm obviously a little bit higher than you on Minority Report. It's not, the top Spielberg, but I thought it was an interesting attempt.
Okay, fair enough.
So next up, then we had Catch Me If You Can in 2002, same year as Minority Report, actually. And this is Spielberg's only pairing with Leonardo DiCaprio. It was his second pairing with Tom Hanks. They'll do another later on. And it was based on the true story and autobiographical book of Frank Abagnale Jr., one of the biggest con men in history, who was chased for years and years by an FBI agent. And then at the end, when he's caught, he ends up going and working for him. And this is all true. So in addition to DiCaprio and Hanks, it had roles for Christopher Walken, Martin Sheen, Jennifer Garner, and a very young Amy Adams. And it was nominated for two Oscars and was a pretty big hit. It was the 11th highest grossing film of 2002. And thematically, this was a return to Spielberg themes about broken families.
Mm.
Like that is really what drives this whole story. It's Frank Abagnale. His parents are splitting up. His home is basically his home life is destroyed as he knows it, and he's just constantly on the run and in search of a family or a place to belong. And I thought that was really good that they brought a coherent theme to the story, which is basically just a story about a con
Knock knock.
man who's there.
Go fuck yourself.
I love that line from the movie.
Yeah, I
You
just
want me to tell you a joke? Here's a joke.
yeah, just an anecdote. I saw this movie with my dad, and he just busted out laughing. And he wasn't a huge movie fan, but he would repeat that all like, throughout the rest of his life. So it's just one of my dad's favorite jokes in any movie. So that always just gets me whenever I see
And it's
that.
funny
But
hearing it out of Tom Hanks too, because he doesn't drop F bombs very often in
yeah,
movies.
especially since it's a PG-13 movie and you're only
Yeah,
allowed one F-bomb, and they chose to use that, but
it
it
worked.
landed. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah, but you're right. Because Frank Abagnale is not a bad guy. He's just lost.
Yeah.
And while he is a con man, there's not. I'm not gonna say it's a victimless crime that he pulls throughout, but it's like he's always ripping off like Pan Am and like multi-billion dollar
Yeah, and
corporations where
banks and things. Yeah,
yeah
it's hard to
where
feel too sorry for
yeah,
them.
where they're not even going to miss the couple $1 million that he's scamming off of them. So yeah, it's a really good character study, and Leo pulls it off for sure. It's probably the last film where DiCaprio was a young baby-faced heartthrob because he'd go on to do The Aviator and The Departed in the next few years, and so he's transitioning into more adult roles, and it just goes to show how DiCaprio slash his agents or handlers or whatever have just manicured his career in such a way where he's able to play just great roles from the time he was a kid up till
Yeah,
just the present day. So yeah, it's one of my favorite Spielberg movies. I think it's one of his more underrated ones as far as if you look at his catalog. But
interesting.
yeah, I've always since it came out, I've always loved Catch Me If You Can. And then Spielberg turns around and does another Hanks collaboration in The Terminal. But in my opinion, it's by far their worst collaboration.
Yeah,
It's
of the
a
four. Yeah, I was right. It wasn't just three. Yeah, they do. He does two more. Yeah, so
yeah,
it's four collaborations. Sorry.
it's a dramedy, and Hanks plays an Eastern European dude who's trapped in JFK Airport in New York for an extended period of time due to customs and immigration issues after his country, it's kind of a nondescript Eastern European country. I forgot where he's from. It doesn't really matter. It's just like they have a coup and they're not letting him through. Tom Hanks is charming as always, but it just doesn't really hold up as a Spielberg movie. A quick aside, I even forgot to include this in this very list until Martin alerted to me alerted me about my omission. So it was still a hit at the box office though.
Yeah, and it's such an innocuous movie that it's always showing up on TV. I've noticed like there's hey, the terminal, not so much anymore. Movies don't I don't really see movies on TV, but or nobody does. But for
Yeah.
many years it was one of these ones that just kind of they'd be playing the terminal because it's such an easily accessible movie. But you're right, it's not a fantastic movie. It's maybe notable for a very young Zoe Saldana who's in
Mm.
it, which is interesting. But there isn't too much more. This is loose, very, very loosely based on a true story. There was a guy who was kind of stuck in visa citizenship limbo and was basically stuck in an airport for a number of years. And so it's very loosely based on that, but it isn't really that guy's story.
Yeah, and this is this is still during the heyday of the War on Terror. So no airport was going to let film crew in and kind of film this thing, so they had to build a whole film set in LA because they tried like going to LAX and JFK and all this shit. Like, fuck no, we got enough problems as it is right now. Anyway, then we have War of the Worlds in 2005, a sci-fi action movie based on the H.G. Wells novel the same name, and of course the Orson Welles radio play that came out in the 30s. Marks another collaboration between Spielberg and Tom Cruise. Also stars Dakota Fanning and Tim Robbins. Aliens invade Earth and chaos ensues. What are you gonna do? It was I saw this in theaters, and I since that I was always like meh on it. I made my feelings perfectly clear on Dakota Fanning when we did our Cinco de Mayo podcast when we were talking about Man on Fire. I could not stand her. Still, it was another in Spielberg's great box office successes.
It was, and yeah, I like Dakota Fanning a lot more than you do, and but I'm with you on this movie. It's just kind of there. It's an unnecessary reboot. I mean, I guess it was a radio play rather than a film, but this is also another one about broken families and single parents and stuff as kind of the underlying themes. Very very Spielbergy in that way, but I don't think anybody really needed this movie to be made. It's just kind of a paint by numbers alien invasion type film. So not one of Spielberg's best.
And extremely anticlimactic as
Yes.
well. Just,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah, exactly. But then we move on to in 2005, the same year, we've got Munich. And it's kind of surprising. It was surprising to me until we started listing them and I started going through them. Just how many based on true story movies Spielberg has done.
Mm,
And this is another. It's based on a book called Vengeance about the operation, the real life operation of the Israeli Mossad to track down the people responsible for the terrorist attacks at the 1972 Munich Summer Olympics. And basically, the operation was to hunt them down and kill them. That was the operational parameters. So it stars Eric Bana, Daniel Craig, Ciaran Hinds, Mary Jose, yeah, it was Mary Jose Cruz, uh, Jeffrey Rush, and a bunch of others. It was nominated for 5 Oscars, including another directing nomination for Spielberg. It's a complicated movie, and I'm not sure that audiences really knew what to do with it at the
mm.
time. It is definitely the most morally ambiguous film that Spielberg has ever directed.
Yeah, yeah, good point.
I mean, I don't think he comes down on the side of, hey, vengeance is the answer, but he leaves a lot up to question what is the answer in the face of violence like this. Is there a place for retribution? What does retribution do to people? That these aren't new themes. That kind of thing goes all the way back to Alexander Dumas' Count of Monte Cristo, right? But it is still, I think it is very well handled in this movie. And because it's so ambiguous and nuanced in terms of what he's trying to say on this issue, I'm not sure that audiences quite latched onto it in the same way that they might have if it had just been straightforward.
Yeah, this is another one of my favorite Spielberg movies. I think the problem is that it's completely lost its relevance.
Mm,
Like Trouble in the Middle East,
yeah.
like altercations between Israel and Palestine.
No, no, no. It's all peace over there now. Yeah.
Dude, that was like 20 years ago. Like what the fuck? No, this is obviously extremely relevant, especially today, especially in the past week or so. I mean,
Yeah.
goddamn, like this has been going on for 2000 years plus. So,
Yeah.
but the way that Spielberg as a Jewish American is able to kind of handle this with not just going gung ho for Mossad was
Not at
really
all.
really admirable in
Yeah.
my opinion, and I think this ages really well, especially if again, especially today if you go back and watch it. Like, and this is a great companion piece with remind me the movie that came out last year.
Yes. October. No, September. What was the date? Yeah, the one that was about the news crew that handled this the actual attacks. That is terrible. I'll think of it, but or I'll
Okay.
find it here
Yeah.
as you're talking.
Anyway, yeah,
I,
it's
I was thinking that too, though. Yeah,
yeah, definitely two sides of the same story and two different angles on the exact same event.
September 5 is what
September
it's called.
5. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, not a great title. Well, not a memorable title at least.
yeah, yeah.
But yeah,
Very good movie though. I
yeah,
think we both loved that movie.
yeah, definitely. Uh one of my favorite things, again, a movie referencing another movie is Seth Rogen in Knocked Up when they're all sitting around getting high, talking about like, oh, why are Jews such pussies in all these movies? And he's like, no, man, Munich, man. Eric Bana's kicking ass. That's like that's Munich is all about Jews kicking ass. But but yeah, great performances from the ensemble cast, all the way from Eric Bana to Kieran Hines, and yeah, top to bottom. Yeah, very good message, very good movie. Go back and watch it or watch it if you haven't already.
Yeah.
And then we pivot to Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull.
Probably needed a palate cleanser after Munich.
It seems like that's kind of what he does, though. If we're
Yeah,
looking at it as a pattern, he does like 2 or 3 like really adult, serious movies that he's like, "Fuck it, let's do another Jurassic
yeah,
Park or let's do another
yeah.
Indiana
I'm gonna have
Jones."
fun. Yeah.
So yeah, Crystal Skull in 2008. The less said about this one, probably the better. I got dragged to the theater to see this one by an 80s movie fanatic friend and roommate at the time. Thanks, Steve. He's one of our subscribers, so fuck you. I hadn't seen Raiders yet, even. So this is my
Oh
first
wow.
intro. Yeah, this is my first introduction to the indie franchise. Probably
Good
why.
God. What
Probably
the
why it
hell?
took. Yeah, probably why it took me another 10 years or so to finally revisit the franchise
Oh,
after
that's horrible.
I got over my initial trauma. Uh, Again though, massive financial hit. So what are you gonna do?
Yeah. And honestly, I mean, there were some fun parts of this movie, but overall, it was not what an Indiana Jones movie should be. And sadly, it's just always going to be famous to the end of time for under the phrase "nuke the fridge," which
Mm.
is yeah, which is basically one of the most ridiculous scenes in all film history.
Yeah, the best thing to come out of this was the South Park episode where they where they lampooned this and had George Lucas and Steven Spielberg raping Indiana Jones in one of their episodes, bending him over a barrel and like parodying Jodie Foster, the accused, and shit like that. It's like really dark, but you know that's what those guys do. So.
Yeah, yeah. Then we move on to another one, 2011. This is one of the only ones I have never seen and don't really have any inclination to see this movie. This is The Adventures of Tintin. Now, Spielberg had been a big fan of these comic books when he was young, and it actually was originally planned as a trilogy of Tintin films. But yeah, and this was in Spielberg was kind of in his I'm playing around with film technology point of his
Yeah.
career, not to the extent of James Cameron, but still. And so this was his first motion capture animation movie. It actually did reasonably well at the box office, but had a massive budget and just never really caught on with public's attention. So they they scrapped the idea for a trilogy. They didn't make any more of these.
Yeah, I never saw it mostly because the trailers had that creepy uncanny valley effect where you know they're trying to make for people that don't know what the uncanny valley is, I don't want to get too much in the weeds here, but it's like if you're making characters that look like cartoons, that's fine, but if you try to make realistic looking people and you fall like just short, it has this really like visceral effect on people that kind of makes them creeped out and grossed out. So it's kind of like a um, evolutionary biology thing where people are supposed to be like, okay, that looks like kind of like a human, but it's not really human. The same thing happened like the Polar Express and other films of
Yeah.
that time where they're really
And,
trying to
and
play with.
maybe some of that, even though they weren't supposed to be human, in the most recent Snow White movie with the dwarves. But
Okay. Yeah, probably because I mean that was basically last minute. Oh God, we gotta spend another 100 million on this one. But yeah, so it was mostly that reason why I didn't see it because it just creeped me out, and I've still never seen all of Polar Express because of that same thing. So
right. Yeah.
then we have War Horse. It's ostensibly a World War One film, but really it's about a boy and his horse. It tells the tale of a British horse named Joey who's called into action against Germany in 1914. It's definitely a movie that tugs on your heartstrings, especially if you're an animal lover like myself. It's really well done, and I would definitely call it a good movie, but just not one of the quote unquote great like Spielberg classics. It's probably like mid to lower range as far as my favorite ones. It wasn't really that well received at the box office, though it did make a profit, and that might have been because there were a lot of horse movies that came out around that same time, like Hidalgo and Secretariat and Seabiscuit. Like they all came out like within like the five
Oh
year span
yeah,
of
that's
one
right.
another. So it's like
Yeah.
it's like horse overload for whatever reason. Like Hollywood gets on these weird trends, like oh horse movie, give me a horse. Is weird. Okay, anyway.
Yeah, I never this is the second one and the only other one on this in this podcast that I've never seen. And I think that's just because of I think I was in Venezuela at the time, hard to see movies coming out. But from what I've read about it, it very much reminds me of this fantastic book by Canadian author Timothy Findlay called The Wars,
Hmm.
which involves at the heart of its story, it's about a kid and his horse. So at some point, I'd like to reread The Wars and then watch War Horse and see if there actually are any connections or look into any connections. But yeah, this is one I can't really comment on. Then we move into another historical movie. And in 2012, he did Lincoln. Now, we talked about this movie back in the fall on audio before we joined YouTube, when we talked about political movies before in advance of the last US election. So I won't go on too long about this movie, but it's about Lincoln. Um, no, but really, it's a movie about the passing of the 13th Amendment to the
Mm.
US Constitution to abolish slavery. It stars basically a million great actors, like notably Daniel Day-Lewis as Lincoln, Sally Field as Mary Todd, David Strathairn, Joseph Gordon-Levitt, James Spader, Tommy Lee Jones, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Just so many people are in this thing. It was nominated for 12 Oscars and won two, including Daniel Day-Lewis's record third and final Best Actor Oscar. And I said it before and I'll say it again. It's a procedural movie about the congressional passage of a constitutional amendment, and yet it's fucking gripping. It is just Steven Spielberg, master filmmaker at work. I love this movie.
Yeah, 100%. I mentioned, yeah, that Amistad was basically a courtroom drama, but there was still a lot of like really high energy action scenes and shit like that. But yeah, Lincoln didn't have any of that at all, and it was just the best movie about passing a piece of legislation ever
Ever,
made.
absolutely. Yeah. Yeah,
And
the only action is like out of shape guys running across the Washington Mall, basically. It's like,
and I mean, you tackle a figure like Lincoln, and so many angles you could take in this one, considering
yes,
Abraham Lincoln is one of, if not the most defining figure of American history, if not in Western history, at least in the past 200 years or so. So, focusing on this small yet massively important place in time was a real choice and a risky one, but definitely one that paid off for Spielberg and the entire um, movie.
yeah, I'm really glad you brought that up because this is something I've thought about biopics for a long time.
Mm,
That most biopics, now there are some exceptions, but most biopics, if they're, oh, this is the whole story of the person's life from this and this and this and this and this and this, they begin to get very episodic.
sure.
And at the end, they're not really that great. The best biopics, in my opinion, are the ones that focus on a particular point in time or some event that this person's involved in. And through that, you see something about their character.
Hmm.
And that's what this movie does so well. Lincoln is probably most famously associated, aside from the Civil War, with quote unquote ending slavery. And this shows him doing that. But the moral complexities that go into legislation, what was going on in his home life. Like there's a lot of things that are going on here, and it shows Lincoln the man in this incredibly stressful situation. And I think this is, if anybody is thinking about, oh, I want to do a biopic on this person or this person, and you're a filmmaker, take a look at Lincoln. This is a great way to do a biopic.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, because such a such a massive figure. And if you focus on the micro and work outwards, it works a lot better in my opinion. And that's kind of what you just illustrated. That if you just tell a birth to death story, it's kind of just like, well, why don't you just watch like the History Channel documentary or something like that?
Exactly.
So
Yeah.
if you're
Or
doing
yeah,
a narrative
read a book.
film where we're trying to evoke emotion, which is what storytelling in film is supposed to do, then this is the angle to take.
Yeah. I said read a book, and then I looked over to my left. But as people can see, I've got no books on my shelves. So in a few weeks, you will see a totally different backdrop because I am moving. You probably see some moving boxes and stuff in the back there. But yes, anyway, little side note.
So then we have another very serious Spielberg fare at Bridge of Spies in 2015. Now, okay, this is the year that you and I, Martin, and I went to film school together. We were at
Yes,
our
yes.
usual hang at the bar on top of the Holiday Inn in Burbank. And you were praising this film. You had just gone to the theater and seen it. And I said, in an almost Larry David fashion, eh, not a big Spielberg fan. And you almost did a spit take when you were sipping on whatever you were sipping on at the time, as you almost did just then. Now,
That was very well timed.
I've obviously softened my stance since then, as I've evolved as a movie watcher. But that moment definitely sticks out of my mind. So yeah, Bridge of Spies, 2015 spy thriller starring Tom Hanks again and Mark Rylance. It tripled its $40 million budget to earn 165 million. It received 6 Oscar noms, with Mark Rylance winning for Best Supporting Actor.
It's funny that you mentioned that this is the film that was me trying to convince you that Steven Spielberg is a great filmmaker, because even though it is a very good film and a very enjoyable film, it's kind of forgettable.
Mm.
And I probably should have, because it's forgettable for me, but I didn't. This isn't one of the ones that I went back and rewatched this week. But yeah, it just kind of fades into the background for me. I remember it's a Cold War film about an exchange of prisoners and stuff like that, and it's very well crafted. But this movie, in retrospect, doesn't stand out for me in Spielberg's whole catalog.
Uh, for the record, I always knew that Steven Spielberg was a great filmmaker. He just wasn't like one of my favorites.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
Because like, if I was in film school and I was like, yeah, Steven Spielberg, he
Yeah, he
sucks.
sucks. He doesn't know what he's doing.
Yeah.
Doesn't know which end of the camera to point.
Yeah. That'd just be like the 14-year-old punk rock, like just anti-establishment
Yeah.
take.
Beatles
Like,
are
no,
terrible. Yeah.
yeah. Like, no, man, Kevin Smith's the best director of all time. Somehow I just threw that out. Nothing against Kevin Smith, but
Oh, good God.
okay. Yeah, so next up.
Yeah, so yeah, okay, on to one now that didn't necessarily expose Spielberg as one of the as possibly the greatest filmmaker of all time, and that is the BFG. This was another foray into motion capture animation. It marked the return of Mark Rylance, whose career had obviously really lifted off after his Oscar in A Bridge of Spies. And look, I loved Roald Dahl books when I was a kid, but I'm really starting to wonder if they actually work as films,
Mm.
because I love this book. It stands for Big Friendly Giant, by the way. And Mark Rylance is this massive stop motion capture animation giant. But I didn't see this movie in the theater, and it took me basically 3 times to get through this movie
Ooh.
trying to watch it, because I just lost interest so quickly. And that's so weird, because as a kid, I absolutely loved all Roald Dahl books. But there have been a few different movies of his books, and none of them, I think, have been all that good. So it may just be subject matter, but this one doesn't stand up as a great Spielberg movie. And also, maybe motion capture animation had its time and just really isn't anything that we need to really talk about much more.
Yeah, that's a fair point. I thought for the longest time that this stood for big fucking giant.
That might have been a more interesting take.
Yeah. I thought although to be fair, I haven't seen this in 25 plus years. I thought James and the Giant Peach was maybe one of the best Roald Dahl adaptations, but again, I have no memory of it other than me liking it when I was a kid. So
Yeah. And well, I didn't love James and the Giant Peach, and I should say, obviously, Charlie and Chocolate Factory, or Charlie and the whatever titles they want to give to him. That's also Roald Dahl, and those have been obviously successful, and people have loved them. I still don't think they capture the magic of Roald Dahl as the written word, but
all
that's
right.
different.
And then we have another pivot. Again, Spielberg.
Yes, big pivot now.
I guess I should go ahead and say this now. One of the craziest things about Spielberg is the array of genres he's been able to cover just from, I guess it's mostly just from having huge early success, so he gets to do what he wants. But like for example, if you go to like a Tarantino movie or a Scorsese movie, or probably to a lesser extent, like a Christopher Nolan movie, you basically know more or less what you're going to get. But with Spielberg, you're not going to know what you're going to get just by a Steven Spielberg film.
Yeah.
It's the exact opposite because he just has that kind of freedom and that kind of creativity.
Yeah,
And
and I think also just that kind of technical talent that
mm,
he can really do anything. And so he isn't limited to one kind of movie. And so he just sort of does whatever interests him from time to time. And he's such a professional technician at his craft that he's just able to do it.
yeah, I didn't really know where to place that thought, but it's one of
Yeah.
the thoughts I've had. But it's because we're about to
Yeah,
switch.
on this pivot. Yeah, that's a good
Yeah,
place. Yeah.
we're about to switch genres again, and we're going to do The Post in 2017, political thriller starring again Tom Hanks, but Meryl Streep's in the mix this time. Set mostly in 1971, this film covers the Washington Post and the publication of the infamous Pentagon Papers, detailing the corruption that was just rampant in U.S. foreign policy leading up to and including the Vietnam War, and still today. Although that doesn't cover that, but it was a pretty good financial success, not one of Spielberg's best. It was nominated for, but didn't win, five AARP awards for movies for grown-ups. It was also nominated for Best Picture and Best Actress for Streep. Just a normal Sunday for her, but didn't win either.
But this is actually a very good movie. And at its heart, it's a movie about the media and the media under pressure. And we talked a little bit about The Insider in our podcast on 1999 movies. And it's a similar kind of movie in terms of the corporate pressures. Basically, the conflict at the heart of this movie is that Catherine Graham, one of the few female editors in chief of in all media at the time, is selling the Washington Post, or at least selling parts of it or taking it public. And so there's this battle between what the corporate world wants and what the news requires if you want to be a real journalist. And so in terms of that, it obviously still stands up today. I mean, this was made in 2017, and it's just been a constant theme. Insider was 1999. This is still as true today as it has been for a while, that, and probably more so now, actually, that there's increasing corporate consolidation of media, that corporate interests are outweighing journalistic interests.
Yeah, this is another one where we were both still living in Burbank at the time, so we
Yeah.
had a discussion over this one over drinks, and you've always been higher on this one than I was, probably because I'm not as high on Spielberg or Meryl Streep as you are. I don't think that she has the range that a lot of people think she has.
I'm not
And
necessarily super high on Meryl Streep, actually.
oh, okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Okay. I guess that's something we get into at some point, but all right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I liked it. I just thought it was not as good as some other journalism movies, I guess.
Right. Like Spotlight or something like that, for instance.
Yeah.
Right. Then we move on. And again, he's pivoting again, absolutely. And so in 2018, he does Ready Player One. Now, this is a sci-fi movie based on Ernest Clive's novel of the same name. Stars Ty Sheridan, Olivia Cook, Ben Mendelsohn, Mark Rylance again, and Simon Pegg. Now, this is one of these books that for a long time people thought was kind of unfilmable. And it really at its heart, it's a love letter to pop culture and the pop culture of the 80s and 90s. It's set in 2045 when everyone lives in this online world. Wow, it's so futuristic. And it's interesting that Spielberg directed this because, of course, a lot of that culture from the 80s and 90s, Spielberg is partially responsible for bringing to the fore.
Yeah.
But and in there's a lot of Zemeckis things, which of course Spielberg produced a lot of other things in this movie. I actually really like this movie. It's the themes aren't necessarily very complex. It's people raging against corporate culture in a way, and the way that we need to disconnect.
Mm,
But for the time, it's a good message, and I think the movie works pretty well. And because I have grown up through all this time, I just love all the pop culture references
mm.
throughout the film.
Yeah, this is another one I never got around to seeing, and when you saw that again, when you saw this, and you reported he reported back to me like, "I'm your boss." Like, no, I
Zach,
need your
I've got my
input.
report on Ready Player One.
I need this by midnight. Stat. No, but we go
Did you
back
get
and
the
forth.
memo about the TPS reports? Sorry.
But yeah, when you found out that I had no interest in seeing this, you were like completely shocked because on the surface it does seem like something to be right up my alley. But I just thought it looked just from the trailers, like I didn't do any deep dives or research or anything. I just thought it looked so pandering. So I guess that's not the case. So I might want to read.
I mean, it's not the case. It's definitely a lot of stuff thrown in there just to throw it in there, but that's kind of the point. It's this overload of culture, and that's what people are. That's the communication mode of a lot of people in this supposed futuristic world in 2045. But that's kind of true today too. So I think it's intentional that that's in there.
Okay.
So yeah, take of that what you will.
All right. Next up, we have West Side Story. Uh, I hated this movie from the time it was announced. I thought it was a waste of Spielberg's talent to remake a movie that did not need a remake. Most movies don't need a remake that have a remake, but this one especially because it's a remake like of a remake of a musical that's based on a Shakespeare play. So I just thought it was completely unnecessary, and it got nominated for Oscars and shit, and it kind of just made my skin crawl that this was even a thing. And luckily, it while it was a critical success because it's Spielberg and a musical, West Side Story, blah blah blah, it did not do well at the box office. All because of me, because I didn't buy any tickets. But it had Ansel Elgort and Rachel Ziegler as Tony and Maria and the two leads, and I loved Ansel Elgort in Baby Driver,
Yes. Yeah.
but since then he's kind of revealed himself to be a complete douchebag
Hmm.
in just like in interviews in the media and stuff. And Rachel Ziegler, the controversy notwithstanding, like, the whole thing with and this is like way pre Snow White and everything, so I didn't even know who she was at that time. But yeah, uh, this is way towards the bottom of my list of Spielberg films. Do you have anything good to say about this?
Not much, I will say. Yeah, because you're right. It was completely unnecessary remake, and I thought the same thing at the time that you did when it was announced. I thought, why the fuck is Spielberg wasting his time on this? This is something that doesn't need to be remade, and especially when he did such a faithful rendition of it. To like, if you're going to do that, I mean, there were obviously some changes and some differences, but I don't know. I just don't see why he did this. I will say the only positive thing I will say about it is if you took it in a total vacuum, if you just woke up one day, didn't know anything, and watched West Side Story, I think it's somewhat enjoyable as a
Okay.
movie. It's just so unnecessary. And I will say that I think Rachel Zegler gets way too much heat and way too much hate. I think I don't, people have just sort of lost their minds on her, and I don't quite know why. Like she's young, she's maybe made a couple of stupid comments, but whatever. She's anyway. I don't.
Yeah.
I think it's too much. People need to lay off her.
Yeah.
But that's what I'll say about that.
Yeah, she's like 23 or 24 at this point. Like, and she has stances, and every actress or actor has, it's whatever. Like I don't
Yeah.
care. Like
Yeah.
that's neither here nor there.
Yeah. And then that brings us to our final one. Yeah, we're probably running a little long on part two, even though we held it to a tight hour on the first part. And that's The Fabelmans in 2022. And this is basically Spielberg's autobiography. So
Hmm.
it's about a kid and a family that's breaking up, and he finds his escape through film. So for that reason, even though it obviously won't be his last film, it is his last one to date, and it's the perfect one for us to end our whole retrospective on Spielberg because, like, excuse me, all of the themes that we've talked about over the course of these two episodes are brought to light and exposed for what they are in this film. It stars Michelle Williams, Gabriel LaBelle, Paul Dano, Judd Hirsch, Seth Rogen, which is funny that you mentioned Seth Rogen earlier, and then he's in this movie. It was nominated for 7 Oscars, including Spielberg's ninth for Best Director and a screenplay nomination that he shared with Tony Kushner. And it is basically Spielberg telling his story without telling his story.
Hmm. Yeah, it's very much the guarded artist that he's always been. Like he doesn't want to come out and like we mentioned in the last episode, yeah, there has been the like basically the the tell-all documentary called Spielberg on HBO, but he's 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 filtering all these stories about breakups and family and not having a present dad and all that stuff. He's filtering all that through himself, and this is the closest I guess we're gonna get to him telling his autobiography. And do we really want an artist slash filmmaker to just spill all their guts out there and tell their entire story through their eyes? I don't think so. So that's that I like the Fabelmans. It's one of his least successful box office movies, and I guess it's
I mean, it's kind of a hard movie to watch. And
yeah,
also, uh, at some point, filmmakers are going to realize that the general public doesn't really care to watch films about filmmakers.
yeah,
So
yeah,
while they may be interesting to those of us who are film buffs, the general public doesn't give a shit about that stuff. And so, yeah, a young kid like finding his escape through film is just not interesting to 98% of the people out there.
yeah,
But
yeah. I guess it's the reason why there's so many movies about writers, because writers love to
yeah,
write stories about writers. It's
exactly.
all self-insertion and hero's journey, and everybody being the hero of their own story and stuff like that. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's a good movie, but
Yeah.
meh. It's not really worth like going back and rewatching in the way that like E.T. or Saving Private Ryan or Jurassic
Yes.
Park or any
Yeah.
any of those are.
Yeah.
So man, yeah, that's exhausting.
Yes.
So let's just wrap this up and
And
with a
we
couple.
just talked about it for a couple hours. Can you imagine being Spielberg and living
Oh
this? I mean,
God.
the guy is a machine.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, let's wrap this up with just a couple of questions. Big one though. Favorite Spielberg movie?
Okay, so we will get to what we think are the best. In terms of favorite, the movie that I always smile when I'm watching, I have the most fun with, it's still got to be Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. I just fucking love that movie. It is note perfect in terms of being an adventure story. The combination of humor and action and the characters, it's my favorite. I love that movie so much.
Yeah, I kind of saw that one coming.
Yeah, I could see that. How about you?
So for me, it's this took a while for me to sift through, but it's Jurassic Park.
Mm,
It's
okay.
just probably the first Spielberg movie that I saw where I could like interpret story and actually like figure out what's going on, be scared, laugh, and run that kind of gamut of emotions and just be awed as well. So,
Yeah, yeah.
most overrated movie.
Okay, this is going to surprise you, and you may have remembered when you said that you think it's one of his underrated movies that I went, I'm going to say Catch Me If You Can.
Really? Okay.
Yeah, because although I did, as I said, they did have this sort of through line of him kind of running to find a family. I did think this one ended up being a bit too episodic at the end. It's like, oh, okay, here's the part where he's going to decide to be a pilot. Now here's the part where he's going to be a lawyer, and here's the part where he's going to decide to be a doctor. And there was a bit of a through line, but it's not, I don't think it's one of his absolute best. And a lot of times it's held up that way. So I would say it's his most overrated.
Interesting. Interesting. Wow.
It's certainly
Okay.
not, I don't, it's not one of his like bottom 5 or 10, but I just think it's not one of his best.
Okay. I had my most underrated movie as Catch Me If You Can uh, uh,
Interesting.
until a few hours ago when I was able to throw in Amistad.
Okay.
So that would have been, yeah, that's an interesting dichotomy though, that
Yes.
I thought Catch Me If You Can was that underrated, and
Yeah.
but at the end of the day, yeah, and you solidified that argument, especially with when you were talking about Amistad. So yeah, I'm gonna go with Amistad.
What about your most overrated?
Oh, overrated. West Side Story.
Oh, okay. Oh, I don't even think that's really rated,
It
but
got nominated for
okay.
Best Picture.
I suppose. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Fair enough. You're right. I actually had the exact same one for underrated. It's almost odd. This
Mm.
movie almost never gets talked about, and it's a fantastic fucking movie.
And last, before we sign off, Best Genre for Spielberg.
This is so hard to
Yeah,
tell
it
because
really is.
the crazy thing is this is going to be wild given who Spielberg is and what he's known for. But I kind of think it's historical drama.
Mm.
Like between Saving Private Ryan and Lincoln and
Schindler's
Schindler's
List,
List and
Amistad.
and Amistad and The Post and is it and Bridge of Spies, like it's kind of historical drama, even
Yeah.
though he's obviously an amazing sci-fi director and everything else.
Yeah, my favorite movies of his tend to be historical drama, but at the end of the day, it's sci-fi for me just because
Okay.
that's what he's going to be known for.
Yeah.
Mostly just, I mean, if you're looking at like the highlight reel of Spielberg, it's gonna be like dinosaurs and ET and Close Encounters, the UFO coming down and all
Yeah.
that good stuff. So while I do agree that if you're looking just from a straight filmmaker's perspective or a film enthusiast perspective, that yeah, it is historical drama. And that was definitely one two for me, but
Yeah, me too. Sci-fi was second for me. Yeah.
yeah. But yeah. One of the best filmmakers of all time, no doubt about it.
Hell of a career. Yeah.
So next week we're gonna have the ranking of these all of these Spielberg movies, top to bottom, and we're gonna try to stay objective and not just do our favorites as we have done in the past with previous like our vacation movies or Cinco de Mayo movies and or Mexican Mexican movies and stuff like that. So yeah, this guy's career has just been so impactful that we had to expand it one more episode than we thought we were going to do.
Everybody likes a good ranking, so we're gonna rank all of Spielberg's movies. Yeah.
Yep. So we will see you next week on Unsolicited Film Reviews at noon on Friday. I am Zach Miller. He is Martin Cook.
We'll figure this out one day.
Yeah. See you next week, guys.
Bye, everyone.